In 2015, an industrial strategy was announced in Beijing. It didn't make headlines right away, but within a few years, the shockwaves became impossible to ignore. Washington issued warnings. Europe pushed back. Global tech companies grew uneasy. Soon, the plan's name disappeared from Chinese state media. But the policy didn't stop. On the contrary, it quietly expanded, quietly ate into global market share, and quietly forced the world to play by new rules. The question is, how did China pull this off? How did a country once almost entirely dependent on Western technology rise to dominate electric vehicles? Lithium batteries, drones, 5G networks, and renewable energy, and more importantly, what price did it pay to get here? For decades, China was the world's factory. It made everything, from clothes and toys to smartphones and computers. But making things is not the same as controlling them. Chips were still made in America. Operating systems were still controlled by America. Precision machinery came from Japan and Germany. Medical equipment from Europe. China did the labor. The profits, and the power, went elsewhere. That's what China's leaders wanted to change. Starting in 2015, a sweeping strategy was put in motion. It wasn't just about growth. It was about control over supply chains, core technologies, and global positioning. Instead of relying on the market, China used the heavy hand of the state. Massive funding poured in from state-guided investment funds. Foreign companies were pressured to transfer technology if they wanted access to the Chinese market. Policy banks handed out cheap loans. Most importantly, domestic firms received maximum state support. It wasn't just about money. There were laws, there was direction, there were procurement rules, tax incentives, and quiet but decisive protection. The plan no longer had a name, but every ministry knew what to do. It was a machine, tightly programmed, silent, and unstoppable. And then, industry by industry, China began to take over. Looking at the landscape nearly a decade later, one thing is clear: China has made real gains. In many sectors, made in China is no longer a cheap imitation, it's the market leader. Take electric vehicles, for example. BYD, once dismissed as a cheap imitator, has now overtaken Tesla in global EV sales. Lithium batteries, China's CATL supplies everyone from BMW and Tesla to Hyundai and dozens of other automakers. Drones, DJI has no real competition left. 5G, despite US sanctions, Huawei is still holding its ground and expanding. Solar panels, cargo ships, wind turbines, power transformers. The list of sectors where China leads in output, exports, and supply chains keeps growing. And it's not just about manufacturing. China is also making big strides in intellectual property. It now leads the world in international patent filings, especially in cutting-edge fields like artificial intelligence, industrial robotics, and advanced materials. But on the other side of the global industrial map lie the areas China still can't crack. Advanced logic chips, the kind used in AI, supercomputing, and military systems, remain in the hands of the US, Taiwan, and the Netherlands. Chip-making machines, like extreme ultraviolet, EUV, lithography tools, China still can't make them. Jet engines, the heart of the aviation industry, are still imported. Biopharmaceuticals, next-general vaccines, engineering software, enterprise operating systems, China is pouring tens of billions of dollars into these areas, but still lags far behind. In other words, China can make a lot, but it still struggles to make the hardest, most high-value things, and to make them well. Its success in scale is undeniable, but when it comes to quality, innovation, and profitability, China is still chasing the US, Japan, and Europe. So the real question isn't, can China build it? It's, can China do it well, without Western technology? While Western countries bet on free markets, China chose a different path: planning, steering, and control. Instead of letting competition decide who rises to the top, Beijing created its own champions, with money, with laws, and with monopolistic power. China's tech unicorns weren't born in garages like Apple or Google. They were built with government funding, soft loans that didn't need to be repaid, generous tax breaks, and state-directed investment funds. In semiconductors alone, China has poured in over $200 billion from national and provincial investment arms. And in EVs, companies like BYD, NIO, and Xpeng relied for years on government subsidies, sometimes worth thousands of dollars per car. But money wasn't the only lever. Laws, regulations, and technical standards were also used to tilt the playing field in China's favor. Local governments were instructed to prioritize domestic products in procurement. Technical standards were written in ways that made it nearly impossible for foreign companies to comply, unless they built their factories inside China. In other words, if you wanted to sell in China, you had to manufacture in China, and to manufacture in China, you often had to enter a joint venture with a Chinese firm. And once you did that, your technology, sooner or later, got absorbed or copied. This wasn't a free market. It was a strategic game. Every technical rule became a shield. Every financial subsidy, a push forward, and every chosen domestic firm was a piece in the industrial chessboard. In that environment, foreign competitors weren't squeezed out because they were weaker, but because the rules had been rewritten. No victory comes without a price. And for China, the cost of its technological ambition is becoming more visible. When the state injects hundreds of billions of dollars into production, the question isn't, can they make it? But rather, can they sell it? The result? Massive overcapacity, too many electric vehicles, too many batteries, too many solar panels, factories running below capacity, and yet, new ones keep being built, because every project is a political milestone for a province, a district, or a well-connected firm. Supply is abundant, but demand, much weaker. Domestic consumption is soft. Chinese consumers are cautious, saving more, spending less, and exports are hitting walls. The US and Europe are erecting tariffs, launching anti-dumping investigations, and tightening import controls on Chinese products. Meanwhile, debt is piling up. Local governments have taken on massive loans to fund industrial expansion. State-owned firms borrow from policy banks with ease, but returns are often poor. Many firms keep operating despite chronic losses, propped up by continuous bailouts. Projects are launched with fanfare, only to be abandoned a few years later. And perhaps more damaging than debt is the loss of reform momentum. When companies know the state will always step in, they have no real incentive to innovate, to compete, or to become more efficient. The system drifts into a state of half-market, half-plan, where vested interests and protection override basic economic logic. And like any system without checks and balances, imbalances begin to build. Production races ahead of consumption, investment balloons beyond returns. Political achievements matter more than real efficiency. What started as a technology strategy is now drifting toward a triple trap. An overcapacity trap, a financial trap, and a trust trap, where everyone sees the risk. But no one dares to stop. No one can deny it. China has come a long way. But progress does not guarantee victory. Right now, Beijing holds a commanding presence in many critical industries. Electric vehicles, batteries, clean energy, drones, shipping, 5G, Chinese players are everywhere. But this is only phase 1 of the contest. Phase 2, mastering core technologies, foundational software, and true innovation, remains a much harder road. China can produce batteries cheaper than anyone, but the machines used to test battery quality still come from Europe. It can build electric vehicles that run, but the software, AI chips, and autonomous driving systems still rely on the US, Japan, and Taiwan. In fact, many Chinese firms lead the market in volume, but not in profits. They win on scale, on price, and on policy support, but not necessarily on creativity or technology. And now, one major variable is changing: the rest of the world. The US is no longer standing by. Europe is no longer naive. More and more countries are rebuilding industrial defenses, reshaping supply chains, and imposing tariffs on Chinese goods, all in the name of economic security. China now faces a more closed world, one where access to Western technology is no longer guaranteed. But perhaps the bigger challenge is coming from within. China itself is turning inward. Data is becoming harder to access. Companies are facing tighter censorship, surveillance, and political risk. Innovative entrepreneurs, like Jack Ma or Ren Zhiqiang, have disappeared from the public sphere. In an ecosystem where every idea needs official approval, and every talent must align with political expectations, can true technological breakthroughs ever happen? The future of China's tech ambitions doesn't depend on how much money it invests. It depends on how open the system is, how transparent, and how willing it is to tolerate creative risk. Right now, that's exactly what the system is lacking. Nearly a decade after launching its industrial strategy, China has shifted its place on the global technology map. It's no longer just the world's assembly line. It has become a serious contender, even a leader, in many sectors. It has forced the world to stop, reassess, and react. But behind every high-tech factory, every export boom, every glowing report, lie the unanswered questions. How long can a model built on subsidies, control, and coercion stay sustainable? Can innovation truly flourish in a system where failure is punished and success requires permission? And has China really escaped the shadow of Western technology, or is it simply racing through a well-decorated maze with no exit? In a fragmented world, where every country is trying to secure its own supply chains, the question is no longer, what can China produce, but rather, how will China shape the future of global technology, and how will the rest of the world respond? Because in this new era, technology is not just a product. It is power, it is a strategic weapon, and it is a game where whoever writes the rules controls the future. If this video helped you see what lies behind the headlines, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear it.